Nice.
Yeah.
So you found
okay,
like a different
hello.
way into it
Yeah.
rather than
Can you
cursive.
hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Welcome everyone to this Critics talk about this year's MA exhibition Picnic, which is shown here at Bergen Kunsthall. As every spring, the exhibition shows the MA projects of the graduate students from the MA program of Fine Art at the University of Bergen's Faculty of Art, Music and Design, which means that it's a large exhibition with very many different artists. It's work heavy and it spans a huge variety of mediums and topics of investigation. It has been curated by Randi Grov Berger, which many of you probably know from MRes here in Bergen. The class of 2022 is a large one, including 27 students working in different mediums, as I said, including textile, ceramics, video, text, performance, therapeutic sessions, ephemeral gestures, interventions in both public and private spaces, body instruments, and much more. The show also includes quite an extensive program of performance and events spread throughout the exhibition period. The class is composed of many different nationalities, less than half being Norwegians. And they have been working together here in Bergen for the last 2 years, which has been a special period in many ways, especially as it overlaps with the COVID-19 pandemic, which has largely affected their study situation. The show and projects are also special in that the final weeks or the final period has been, of course, affected by the war in Ukraine. Whether or not these things is visible in the works will be, maybe we'll talk about that in the conversation. But anyway, I would like to tell you before we start that I'm very impressed with you all for finishing your projects in time, even like despite these hard conditions. That's so. An applause for all of you. So we should see this talk and this whole day as an opportunity to celebrate you and the exhibition, and as coming together as a last joint feast before you start your new and separate journeys in the art world as professional artists. You're probably all exhausted after a full day seminar, so I hope you still have some energy left to actually get something out of this conversation before we can party together afterwards. With me to discuss the exhibition in this talk, which is facilitated by VISP and supported by KMD, are these three wonderful people, which is Sergei Timofeyev and Ragnhild Aamås and Mitch Speed. Yes, I can introduce you briefly. So Sergei was born in Riga, Latvia, where he is also based. And for the past 10 years, he has been a working member of artterritory.com, which is an art and culture online publication in Latvian, English, and Russian, which focuses on Baltic, Scandinavian, and Eastern European artists. He is also the author of 9 books of poetry published in Latvia, Italy, Georgia, and Macedonia. Ragnhild is based in Oslo. She has studied philosophy and archaeology at the University of Oslo and MRes Art Exhibition Studies at Central St. Martin's College, and has a master's degree as a visual artist from the Oslo Academy of Arts. And she regularly contributes to Kunstkritikk with texts and has published several other places as well. Mitch is a Berlin-based writer who has written for a long series of different platforms, And in 2019, his study of Mark Lecke's video work, Fiorucci Made Me Hardcore, was published by After All Books as part of their one-work series. And his collected essays are forthcoming from Brick Press. My name is Tuva Mosin. I work here at the Bergen Kunsthall and also at the University of Bergen. And I also publish regularly in Kunstkritikk, where I cover the Bergen art scene. So welcome to you all.
Tusen takk.
I want to start by just discussing generally your impression of the exhibition as a whole. Does any one of you want to start? Yeah, maybe Mitch?
Sure, why not? Yeah, is that all right? Yeah, the feedback is a little distracting, but I'll get used to it. First of all, thank you for having me here and for having us here. We've been shown incredible, generous hospitality. It's really been a pleasure. And congratulations to everybody in the show. It's an amazing, big moment, I think. And walking through it's objectively an amazing big moment. And walking through the exhibition, I had really fond memories to past, final exhibitions, graduation exhibitions that I've been a part of. I studied art myself, studio art, and there's an energy in this show which is very, very exciting. And I mean that sincerely. When I started scribbling sort of notes randomly on my pamphlet here, on my printout, and the first note that I wrote was liveliness. I just wrote the word liveliness. I mean, what do you do with an exhibition like this? It's so pluralistic. It's comprised of so many different media, so many different styles of making art, so many different ideas. At the same time, of course, one can discern veins and themes within the group, but in general, there's an incredible energy to it. And of course, I note down all sorts of sort of subcategories that we could maybe get into later. The first, material and craft. This. Totally fearless, and I say fearless and shameless because it did seem to me that there was a point at which people might feel fear or might feel shame at using material and color and texture in the way that a lot of artists in this exhibition are using it, at least in the context that I come from, which is Vancouver, which is this sort of like North American art capital, which was built on a very sort of intellectual tradition. In the performance, the last performance that we saw, I wrote down the word catharsis, and then I wrote bringing something back into art that might have been missing. That's something I'm really interested in. I'm interested in the return of sort of affect and feeling to art, but in a way that's like not populist. It's still very, very complex and politically serious, and that's something I picked up in that last performance, but also in other of the artworks, specifically the ones that have to do with kind of like this cocooning, the sort of therapy, sort of womb-like environment, like the Mermaid with the headphones, this kind of thing. I went into that with a lot of travel stress and came out feeling really like relaxed. Nostalgia. There's some very interesting manifestations of nostalgia, which is something I'm tremendously interested in. Before I babble on any longer, I'll give the floor to my esteemed colleagues here, but there's lots to talk about for sure. It's great.
So I can go next. I actually had the pleasure of being a curator for a master's show 2 years ago in Oslo. So it's very strange to see another one. And as Mitch is pointing to, there's a lot of very specific energy in these types of shows, which is quite different from the one you experience in a more traditional curated group show, I believe. Now, I've also spent the pandemic times becoming a parent. So WISE from earlier situations in panels, I have written down my notes, and I will begin with reading them, and then go to more improvisation afterwards. So bear with me. So, what did I see here? For me, really, what stood out was the notions of care in a very much more manifest way than I've noticed in master's degree shows before. And posed next to one of its most immediate counterforces, longing. And then again the thematic grounding through time and loops, and this feeling of inescapability, which can be good, can be bad, can be terrible.
Can you repeat which word you used?
Inescapability.
Inescapability, yeah.
And that reminded me about something a friend once said, touched by the recent bereavement of a close relation. And the knowledge of death for the human entity is one thing, but the knowledge of the possibility to end it all is more so, the defining knowledge. And this friend of mine would end that with a quite open "or is it the case?" And there was a quality of asking in that voice, posing this possibility, hoping for a less lonely human entity, perhaps, not governing on our own, yet not governed neither, but yet lonely, lonely, lonely. I think of the work seen here today with the carbon smudges and tree planting. I think of the Mermaid and the hooking of the hair, the leaving of the care. I think of the proud history of Bergen and photography. Because as Vancouver, as far as I remember, Vancouver has a very strong history of quite conceptually driven photography.
That's for sure, yeah.
Yeah, and also here in Bergen, some generations ago, that was like this very strong defining factor of the Bergen Art Academy scene. And we can see some remnants of it here still, but you have changed the structure of the Art Academy here since. And there's the fountain working at a time mirrored, and the sun pose has its counter in a moon pose with a reach. I'm thinking of how to articulate a media critique in our age, where the media is not only the message, but the economy, and how to make it all sensible, as paper-thin skin, skeletal hands wrapped around screens, drumming them ever so softly. Some of your work wants to capture a scene, some to explore narration. How much can the form carry without you? The temptation of supporting the progeny is endless, yet trust belongs in the equation. What is that feeling of safe, comforted, taken care of? And why should it be limited by being deserved? Helen Hester has recently done a lot of research on post-work logic, or the logic of post-work, stemmed against the care deficit. I won't go further into this, but consider the position the notion of work holds. And it's quite bridled in cultural Protestantism. I was touched by the phrase in one of your works, because as a class you have, the pandemic and your differences disregarded affected each other, and thus I address you as a group, curator included. And the phrase went as follows: robots are probably better than humans. Somehow my mind goes to literature often in meeting the visual. And Octavia Butler, in her trilogy of Lilith's Brood, the Xenogenesis, formulates the shackles in this way. The human species is intelligent, yet it is also hierarchical and thus terrible. Do you remember how at the beginning of the pandemic there was a sensation of being flabbergasted by the capacity of change and the speed of it? Now, this event, your grad show, the picnic brings you into the fold of the art world. It lets your feathers brush institutions, curators, and critics. We are all gatekeepers, each in our own way. And some of you will move, some of you will remain within that fold. Some do, others will not. But all in all, we are wiser for our art education. And rituals do matter, and the graduation show is one. And yes, I think I will end there for now. Yeah.
Sergei?
Yeah, I'm thinking about the subject of picnic, and I'm thinking we are having a picnic in a very cold weather. Wind is blowing crazy, but still trees are blossoming. Still, new artists are coming with the ideas and forms and creatures, and it's something which is very deep inside this show. I think that it's kind of a picnic where maybe a blanket is so meaningful, like water or like food, because we sit together in this kind of blankets. Maybe we are exchanging these blankets and taking care about each other, about people who are around. I think, yeah, really care is a big subject here, and also one of the works is called Care Currency. So all this cryptocurrency changed to something very human, something touchable, tactile. And I also love quite a lot video works here, and it was really interesting and deep feeling to watch them and to go deep into the stories. And for example, the work which was called Recycle also was it was big, somehow emotional feeling something very known also for me, and it's very much connected to this, I think, pandemic time where we were stuck in our spaces, but at the same time we were rethinking these spaces as worlds, as something to explore, to make a journey around. And maybe, yeah, because you mentioned that I'm also writing poetry, just one poem about kind of the same feeling, and it's called Remember. We made many journeys around the apartment that day and other days, moved on foot along the windows, rushed down the hall with our tasks, broke into the bathroom and collided with something in the entryway, knocking from the rack an avalanche of coats and jackets, all found there, waiting for something greater. I remember one passage from our son's bedroom into our own, with rain pouring outside the windows and even a lightning strike at one point. But nothing could deter us, intrepid, entrepreneurial, capable, stepping decisively the other way. So yeah, it was the same feeling for me of this world. We are a little bit lost in this world, but we slowly and taking our time, trying to find our ways inside it. And also other video works, I think, were connected also to this subject and work. An artist from Latvia, from the country I'm from, Renate Prokopčika, was also about that kind of contact with the world, which is very big and very small, very huge, and at the same time very detailed. A lot of small details which you can really go into, and also work of Sasha Zanova was something connected to this subject of journey into yourself, at the same coming into the place which is really something different from what you were experiencing
just for those
before.
who can't picture this work in their mind, can you just describe the Sasha?
So it's actually very deep story about like inner conflict, especially nowadays when after the pandemic, when everybody was thinking that maybe new life will come back to us and we will all blossom suddenly, but the war changed the perspective very in a strong way, and so it's a kind of a finding of trying to find this inner balance in all this crazy situation, and so Sasha finds it on an island where some scientists are, small group of scientists in the very, kind of wild nature situation, are living there and making some research about nature. And suddenly, there she finds her inner peace. And it's very briefly, and of course, you just have to follow and to look at it. So it's very vague, description. But I think it's a very good combination of things which are tactile, caring, sometimes in a good way easy, but at the same time things which are deep, taking you inside, taking you into something, somewhere. And it's a very good combination of a picnic and a journey, I would say. That's my point.
Yeah.
Mitch looks very much like you have something to add.
No, I'm just so stimulated by both of what you're saying. I'm writing little things down, and because you're like both of your comments have been firing off these kind of synapses in my head and making me realize things about the exhibition that I hadn't thought of before, which is of course the point of having a discussion. It's great. But I was thinking, yeah, well, you both mentioned care. You both foregrounded care really prominently, and care in art is so interesting because of course, it's incredibly important. But like a lot of incredibly important things, it's open to the possibility of being co-opted, right? And I had the feeling in certain in art of the last 5 or 6 years that the way that care was being dealt with was sometimes irresponsible, sometimes really good and useful and genuine, and sometimes really sort of irresponsible, as if care, not as if, I mean care would be commodified as just sort of subject matter for art rather than being manifested in art where you could really sort of believe in the care, or you could pick up on the fact that the care is actually really there and is doing something for somebody, even if it's just the person who's using their hands and their bodies and their life to make the stuff, which is of course very important. And I think the latter type of care, this sort of authentic, sorry to use the A word, terrible word, but this this authentic kind of care that one can believe in is pretty evident in this show. Which made me think, I'm by the way, all too aware here that we're all at risk of sort of talking about this amazing show that you guys have made in with so many rich details in them in these sort of meta terms without zeroing in on the artworks themselves. So maybe we'll try to burrow in on some more individual details, or I will. What's the role of care and an intimate relationship to materials and taking care of one another, and blankets and art as a kind of metaphorical blanket that goes over one another in a world that is, characterized by so much unbelievable cruelty, which is urgently in need of being addressed. As we know, we don't need to enumerate all of the examples of that. It's horrible. And I think that it just kind of crossed my mind that this exhibition maybe articulates a kind of like, it doesn't solve that problem, it doesn't solve the problem of the relationship between the personal, the sort of individual life inside the home, the experience of surfaces, the experience of the interior of the domestic space, the sheer incredible importance of all of that stuff, which is absolutely not negated by political circumstances or political violence, but which nevertheless needs to be kind of like thought of in tension with, or in some kind of relationship with the circumstances that we're all sort of struggling psychically to deal with every day, especially in Europe and in Eastern Europe at the moment, but all sorts of places all over the world. So I think there's some kind of really interesting sort of societal metaphor kind of buried in this exhibition, not despite, but like precisely through its sort of like appearance of being very at ease and very unthreatening and not having a lot of like easily discernible political content. That's something that was crossing my mind as you were both speaking. And
Yes, you said maybe we should start talking about some specific examples of how care or self-care and resilience is can be found throughout the exhibition. You have already mentioned one work. Do you have a...
Well, it comes in many forms, but for instance, and now I have to check the leaf through this one to find the name, because right now I have a better memory of the visuality than the title and name. Let's see, a moment. Yeah, for instance, Jason Dunn's Bloom and Green Series and Garden, which comprises, as far as I see them, a whole, where there has been a collection of wood, making them into charcoal, and whereupon this has been used as pigment for paintings or drawings. And again, sort of like going full circle back to after the coal has been spent, the series is also over, but then a new tree can be planted, and sort of sketching out a kind of like anti-despair, but very, very slow mode of working in a quite small circuit, potentially, and never taking out more than what you are giving back somehow. Which would perhaps be like a very a small format way of dealing with a problem, like keeping it very, very local and by all means sort of like staying put in the garden. But still, that would be one that I think manifests care very clearly. Not to talk about the Mermaid.
Yeah,
but perhaps you, Sergej,
almost hugging you.
Yeah. but also this very nice detail with the hair, that you are taking the hair from the carrying rig and then attaching it to the sculpture. So you are I was mentioning rituals as well earlier, and very much these small things we do physically can take the place of worrying. Instead of worrying, instead of not having a place to put that energy, you in some way this very little thing that doesn't really mean anything still becomes a carrier of that, and you can leave your worry there.
And it doesn't have to be about care very strictly in a straight way. And I don't know, some works just make you think about it in some way which is more connected just to you and your experiences. And for example, the worker Hanna Persson, sorry if I'm not good with saying names, where have all the flowers gone? Young girls have picked them, everyone. It's very nice work and very I don't know, full of light and forms, and but at the same time, it reminded me just a moment in the forest a few days ago when I've seen first flowers in a forest, and what was sorry, I even write down what is the name of this flower. Yes. Pulsatilla, or Basque flower. And so there are just few in a huge forest, and some children made like wooden, from small pieces of wood, some kind of barrier around this flower, and even wrote a small poster that you don't have to pick up, but please make your photo with it. And some very funny example of kind of new ethics or something. Yeah, but it just connects you to this subject in a very different way. And I think this leaning exercises, we didn't see them because performances were other days, but leaning on something, and it's also somehow connects to this leaning exercise, connects to this surviving in this very moving and changing and sometimes really attacking your world.
I think so too, and more than only leaning, it's also a kind of like interdependent leaning. So your weight, as far as I've understood it, always will be balanced by someone else.
Yeah, I was just struck by what you said, Sergey, about it doesn't always have to be about straightforward care. I mean, I'd be more than happy to make the subject of the conversation care, and like how does that how do the artworks in this exhibition show that care sort of can manifest in sort of unexpected ways, and like art's ability to do unexpected things. And so I was sort of looking and circling different works, and the first thing that came to mind is that how to say it, like, you know, like if an artwork can manage to open up the sort of sensory and semiotic kind of like brilliance of the world in a way that things kind of light up, you know, that's a brilliant sort of act of care or empathy or generosity or something like that, which doesn't have to do with like a literal hug or pat on the back, but it's an incredible act of care towards a viewer and towards the world. I remember a friend, I really learned something when a friend really a German friend really started reading me Bertolt Brecht poems at a certain point, and I remember feeling my stereotype of Bertolt Brecht as this kind of master of disenchantment or something, kind of like melting to the floor, as I realized how beautiful some of his poems actually were and how emancipatory and caring that could be. But as I was going around my list, I mean, I was thinking of this I believe it's Siavash Kierka, this installation with, I'm terribly sorry if I've mispronounced your name, but this installation comprised of, I think, 3 videos, where in one of the videos is looped backwards. I won't even try to explain everything that's going on in this work, but one of the videos anyways is looped backwards, and on the bottom right there's some sort of a musical instrument made of metal. I'm not a musician. But there's these synchronicities between the soundtrack and the motion of this musical instrument, and they disconnect and reconnect in a way that is absolutely stunning, and reminds you of how sort of powerful, subtle effects can be in artwork. And I really think whenever, I mean, this is what I love about writing about artwork is finding these details where something really clicks, and it's actually a very profound experience, which seems very simple. I was thinking about Simone Jarvis's paintings on the wall just back here, and I was thinking about them and thinking about the brilliant American painter Elizabeth Murray, and then I was thinking about flowers as you were talking about flowers, and then I started thinking about psychedelia, and I realized, oh yeah, these are paintings which are sort of synthesizing a psychedelic experience. There's an amazing professor at Columbia University whose name is escaping me right now, unfortunately, but he writes a lot on drug use, on controlled drug use, and I mean like psychedelic drug use, and how it can be undertaken in the absence of mental health problems in a responsible way, and purely for the sake of pleasure, actually, and sort of in the type of intoxication which is like a human right, actually, to have these sort of psychedelic experiences. And I think these paintings are mimicking that kind of, or providing kind of a painterly synthetic version of that, which is incredibly beautiful. There's an essay called Empathy and Abstraction from way back when, which keys in on this kind of potential behavior of painting. So I thought of that. Yeah, there's lots.
I think also that rituals could be something which gatherings, rituals are something also about care, not in direct way, but in some way. And so the performance we've seen just a few minutes before was, I would say, in some way, not sad, but nostalgic, melancholic, maybe in some way. But people really appreciate that possibility to go through it together, to go through this small performance, small ritual together. And I think there are few works around that kind of rituals here, and it's also like inviting you to join, taking you inside, which is very meaningful possibility.
So we've talked now about care and rituals and resilience and the capacity of adaptation, but there's also some other common threads in the exhibition, like, for example, environmental concerns and maybe human-nature symbiosis might be one. Also, we have imagery from folklore and fairy tales, and which is maybe more easily recognizable for a Norwegian audience, I guess. Some of it.
Can tell us something about it.
But there's also institutional interventions. We have some photographs by now the name escapes me. Upstairs and in the stairs.
The studio pieces.
Yeah, they're
very pieces, and the fountain outside, and the bird feeder. Some very nice works. Maybe one of you would like to.
But it's also care about pigeons.
Yes, care about pigeons, and also now for those who haven't seen it or known about it, there is this installation outside of the Kunsthall which is feeding gourmet food to the pigeons. So now Bergen Kunsthall is a pigeon heaven.
Pigeon bistro, but for the pigeons, not serving the pigeon. Yeah.
But talking about these folklore things, somehow this big sculpture in the foyer, what is called?
Påverkans. That is Smørbukk.
What does it
That's a character from Asbjørnsen og Moe. Sure, like the most famous Norwegian fairy tale collectors, almost like the Brothers Grimm in Germany. Yeah, I can't actually remember the fairy tale.
Well, I have to, because now I sort of remember it as being the name of a flower as well, but I am not sure.
Smørblomst.
So yeah, maybe I'm.
And the images are from some Theodor Kittelsen, or playing on Theodor Kittelsen imagery, who he is famous for like Norwegian folklore imagery. Which he
It is also a flower. That's not what I thought.
Okay.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
But also this kind of stories, tales, you folklore. It's something which you are telling each other when it's maybe cold and dark outside, and you want story to be told, and
there's something ritualistic
also,
about
yes,
that as well.
That's right. Yeah, that's what.
Totally ritualistic, and it brings people together. I mean, the folkloric motifs. I don't, because I'm like a North American. You know, we don't, like, white North American. You know, we're sort of our settler history goes back, you know, a few generations, and then we kind of get broken off from this this stuff. I mean, we of course know about the Brothers Grimm and stuff, but I wouldn't have the same, like you yourself said. I can't pick up on the sort of significance of certain motifs in the way that somebody from this part of the world could. But I'm fascinated by what it might mean to make art in this way, actually. And I think I've been thinking about it because throughout the last couple of years, seeing this sort of renewed interest in folkloric motifs in contemporary art, but in this piece especially, I mean, literally interwoven, sorry to be clever, but literally interwoven with incredibly sort of sophisticated weaving techniques, and but it occurs to me, I'm trying to think, what does it satisfy? Well, ritual, a need for a ritual and storytelling. And then I mean, the incredible sort of imaginative power of folk tales and the magic that happens in them, and the sort of depth of them, the kind of like cultural depth of them, which almost is so deep that it could give a person sort of vertigo, these stories that go back and back and back and sort of shapeshift through time. I don't know. It occurs to me that there could be that sort of a real sort of need for that kind of thing again, because we've been drip fed on. I mean, God, I love popular culture, but we've all sort of been drip fed on popular culture, which is sort of obviously plays on these kind of like split second synapses, and we're actively prevented from keeping attention, right? So like this sort of return to these deep stories and their sort of psychedelic imaginative power, I think, is really, really fascinating. But
yeah, it was magic was the right word for this first impression when we just come in. It was magic forest of works and images, and yeah, it was really something connected to this word, this first impression. But there are, of course, very different works, and I'm very interested in works with text and using text in different ways, and I really love the work, the talk, with two figures, like having this conversation, somehow exchanging messages, and it's really with some kind of dramaturgy and some kind of drama inside, but the text appears also on figures, and it works. I think it really works, and the mystery also appears through this text and through this kind of drama situation. That's.
And of course, this in this work, you have these creatures, right? Like this little rabbit or hare, and this dinosaur reptile-ish thing. So it kind of connects also to fairy tales, or like in that you have these imaginary creatures. It does something to how you approach it.
Yeah, by this you are inside this fairy tale. Yeah, you are following this what's happening, and this exchange of messages, and
Ragnhild, do you have something to add?
Well, with that particular work, I was so fascinated with how much it managed to convey about fragility. I mean, there's obviously the narrative it's pointing to about the dangers of being online and communicating, but there is also like just this very precise sense of fragility in the way the characters of sculptures are shaped, and that how it plays off against these the machines they're holding, and perhaps also like the sometimes this very short history of human development compared to the tools we have access to, and what possibilities they create.
I'm wondering if maybe for like the last part of the talk, I think now we've had this full long seminar this day, and there have been artist talks and some lectures, and I'm thinking maybe now that we have a critic talk, maybe we should talk about, since this is maybe for some of the students the first time their work has actually been publicly criticized, both by us now, but also in newspapers and on other platforms. So I think maybe they're interested in hearing what, before they now go out on their own, how their work might be approached. This might be a good thing for them to know about. Like when you write about art or approach an exhibition or an artwork, what do you like? Do you have a specific way of doing it?
Like a warning list of like how does the critic go about his or her job?
No, but it's
well, we were talking about it earlier, a little bit over lunch. I mean, it's a great question and a really big.
Because I think maybe
yeah.
now during our talk, I keep wondering if like the talk of pandemic and self-care, maybe I always have this little feeling that maybe I'm just projecting my own feelings and my own experience during the last period of time, and maybe am I talking more about me or more about the artworks? I think it's in this case definitely both.
Yeah. That's probably also why it's a bit strange to do work as a critic, because you are also of course exposing yourself, and your references and your associations do point back to yourself as well. I think it's also unavoidable, and that's something. But something happens there, and as an artist, you cannot control every aspect of your work. There will always be stuff that's being seen or picked up on by audience and critics and other people.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's not to be...
And that's discovery.
Sure, yeah, and it's not to be something to be sort of condemned or be afraid of or something like that. I mean, I think it's actually... It's like that exact dynamic that you're describing is kind of... it's exactly what is simultaneously really confounding and frustrating and difficult about, I think, both making and writing about artwork, and the sort of quotient that makes it so interesting. I mean, you're all necessarily involved. You're all like involved by definition in a form where you're presenting, that being making contemporary art, where you're presenting like shapes, objects, signifiers in such a way as to be abstract and open to interpretation. I mean, of course, there's usually a kind of an impact or something that you're going for. At the same time, you're begging for a viewer's projection. It's inbuilt into the form, and so when a critic comes to it, they have to wrestle with that. They have to wrestle with the relationship between the sort of some possibility of kind of like an empirical sort of quantifiable effect of the form, and agreed upon cultural symbols and their own projections, and that's what makes, as I said, that's what makes both art making and art criticism really, really tough. And I think that the best art criticism acknowledges that and wrestles with that within the text, and still manages to try to figure out like what was going on with the experience that this artwork engaged me in, and was it worthwhile or not, as old-fashioned as that sounds. But I think it should also kind of always loop self-reflexively back to the critic. It's a complex dance, in my opinion. And I also think artists should also be always writing about one another's work, constantly. I think that would be great. If you want to write, I'm not into bullying people into writing. I think that's terrible. But if you want to write, it's great. Start journals and publish writing on one another's work. Like, don't rely on critics in Frieze magazine and Art Forum and stuff. I mean, they're good, but that they're one kind of beast. You know, I love writing by artists about one another's work. Yeah, it's very important, I think.
Yeah, and then coming back to exhibition, I think it's also very good possibility to show how works are, how they are doing in space, yeah, in this concrete space, and with other works in context of all the exhibition. It's very, I think, helping experience, and sometimes even some small changes. It's daylight or some not so intense light changes the impression so much. It was here with work Next Time We Meet on Broadway, and when there was performance, there was a smaller light, and suddenly I was so inside this piece. It starts make some aura. This we didn't have possibility to see the performance, but I think I got something from just these things in this order and with this light in this moment. And yeah, of course, we were probably not mentioning all the works, but because some of them are working more into formal experiments, and it's very also good way and a lot of possibilities with it. Just, you know, critics, they like to find some subject and then to take everything around it like in some order, but it's not really how it should be always. It's there are, you know, in a forest there are 1,000 different small ways and bigger ways, and they're playing the same role. They have the same meaning, actually.
I think what you say there, Sergei, is really important. There are so many roads that is possible to take when you go into an exhibition and begin looking around and deciding what you will mention and how you will talk about it. But this also points to what Mitch was saying. There is a way of also taking care of each other, taking care of the artists you know by talking about them and writing about their work. And this can also be done by you. I'm thinking of the phenomena, the white pube that came some years ago, that really began just simply by just beginning to write and talk about things they are seeing and thinking about the art pieces instead of waiting for invitations or others to talk about it.
Yeah. Yep. And by taking the language that they wanted to write into their own hands, right? And like by just writing the way they wanted to write.
Yeah.
I mean, magazine criticism, glossy magazine criticism is written. It's an incredibly sort of produced, stylistically produced, heavily edited kind of thing. And I think something like the white pube shows that art criticism can be written in all sorts of different ways. Art criticism can be written like in the way you send one another signal messages, like back and forth, you know, absolutely. And an act of care to write about your friends and and the people in your scene, absolutely. I was reading something that the Irish, an essay that the Irish novelist Colm Tóibín wrote years ago, recently, because I was doing some writing on artists' writing, and he said, to roughly paraphrase him, he said, artists write about other artists to make room for the work that they, you know, care about in the world, like, right? Because like you need to sort of make this idea space, you need to open the territory, like open the room where like this work that you love can sort of exist and be fed with these veins of like ideas and enthusiasm and stuff like that. So that's what writing can do. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and if we start with care, somehow like final feeling from this exhibition for me was also actually from the work which I mentioned when we were starting this discussion. It was from Sasha Azanova. It was interconnectedness of things, and it actually, I feel it also in all the exhibition, that there is this interconnectedness, and it works together and makes an impression. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think maybe that's a nice place to round off, and maybe there's some questions from the audience. Yeah, we have one here.
I wonder that what if you want to come with some critic, what didn't work for you? What was you wish like it was better, or in somehow in different way? So what was you think it was missing in the exhibition?
Marco's bobbing her head.
Thank you for a very difficult question. But it's very difficult because this is a graduation show and it's a very specific type of exhibition, so it's hard for me to evaluate it as I would like a thematic group exhibition or an exhibition stemming from an even more spontaneous community, because the community here is created through a process of juriation when one came to study together at first somehow. But I can say generally, not specifically about this exhibition or the artworks here, but generally I think when something is broken in the logic of the piece, where it doesn't come together, or it comes together too nicely, or it really doesn't create a tension that is interesting in the combination of materials and thinking going into it. And for me, in those situations, that would be one example of something that wouldn't work for me. Yeah.
But I think we also are coming here to look at some maybe kind of generation, what you are thinking about, what you are interested. And for me, it was a little bit kind of surprised that it was so much about these tactile things, craftsmanship, not so much about digital things. So maybe this fashion is over, I don't know.
No more media critique.
Yeah, and
I would like to add also that, of course, what's missing, or what you think is missing, also depends on what expectations you bring with you. And I think it's a bit funny example, because what I'm always looking forward to with the MA exhibitions is exactly that it's so much different stuff, and like it's eclectic, right? But one of the, I'm not naming any names, but one of the local papers wrote, like at the end of the criticism, like what was missing was a common thread, which I thought was a bit funny, because that's the whole, like it's an MA exhibition.
Yeah, that, I mean, fair enough. Yeah, it is a bit funny. It's a kind of a strange, I mean, maybe the person who wrote that's in the room. We can talk about it later. I don't know. But like, what would they like? Would they would they like the sort of the school to sort of like meticulously produce like a group of artists who are all sort of like working in the same,
I don't know.
It's yeah, it's a really, really hard question that you asked. But that's interesting. I mean, when you write criticism, there's a pressure to have there's an incredible pressure to have some kind of an opinion. And with a show like this, I think, well, you described it pretty much perfectly. You approach it differently. It's a different kind of an exhibition. It's not a curated exhibit. I mean, it is a curated exhibition in a sense. It's put together with skill in the room in order to lead you through a certain experience of a group of artists who have grown together. And it works really effectively in that sense. But it's not curated in the sense that it's organized around a theme, one theme that a curator had previously, and they selected the artists obviously to fit that theme. So you can't really judge it on those terms, right? I mean, like, when you asked your question, the first thing that popped into my head is, because I was thinking the show is sort of like there's an interesting sort of democratic experiment with democracy or something going on in a group show like this, right? Like, it's chaotic. All of these different sort of pieces with their own sort of personalities and meanings and contexts, like, take their space, right? And it becomes this really interesting metaphor for democracy. And I kind of thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting if it was even messier, like the world is? But then you get back to care, and you think, well, you can't really impose a sort of a messy democratic experiment in the form of an art exhibition onto an artwork that doesn't want it, or doesn't need it, right? So, that would be the sort of unfair imposition. So, yeah, I think the exhibition functions really well in doing what it does. In terms of what disappoints me in art exhibitions generally, when you see an artwork and you get the feeling that it just passes too cleanly into a certain moment or into a certain intention, that's, I think, the most disappointing. Cliches are totally fine. Too much sentiment is totally fine. Too much political conviction is totally fine. Too much sensitivity, those aren't even too muches. Those are too muches that just end up being interesting somehow. I think when something passes, when an artwork or an exhibition fits so cleanly into a particular kind of moment in time in contemporary art that it just seems calculated and hollow, I think that's just the worst. So that's my answer.
Any other?
If to think about what is missing, but it's not about this show. I think it's maybe about some other shows which I've seen in my country, in different other places. But maybe it's just like that. It's very hard now to find something very experimental, I would say, something really opening new kind of format, new media or something like that. So, but it's maybe a situation like this, not only in visual arts, so it's in culture.
We are living in a golden age where everything has reached its peak form.
Could be, yeah. But I think it's really like a big cultural problem, not problem of some concrete exhibitions, and what we maybe could think about in the future somehow.
It's a really, really interesting question. Oh boy, we're going to keep going, are we? It's no, but it's a really big. It's an interesting question, and a question that I think specifically relates to this exhibition in a way, because as we were talking about earlier, with respect to this folkloric motif thing, I think there's a lot of work in this exhibition that loops back into different levels of art history and uses motifs and methods from different moments in art history in a very unabashed way. Like the work you were describing earlier, I think of this mise en scene, like the Kabakovs. I mean, this influence is quite present there, and you could talk about a lot of the work in this exhibition, I think, in those terms. And there's something interesting to me about this generation of artists willingly returning to these precedents and using them in a way that's quite bold, and not trying to
break it.
What's that?
Break it.
Yeah, right, exactly. Not trying to push the avant-garde sort of ethos to its breaking point, where you end up like dropping, dead cows 100 meters out of the sky like Hermann Nietzsche or something like this. It's not that there's an abandon. I'm serious. There's like an abandoning of an end game strategy, which is feeding into some other type of creativity, and I think that's something that's very evident in the show, and it's, I think, in my opinion, something really, really interesting to talk about.
What it worked.
Pardon me?
I said maybe I can pass the mic to the next person because you turn back to what it worked good for you.
Yeah.
We're
just
really,
yeah.
Kind of.
I guess we just all really like the exhibition. So, any more questions?
My name is Katarzyna. Nice to meet you. Thank you very much for your all beautiful comments. I'm on the exhibition as an observer, and I want to mention this what you were talking about, the difficult times that the exhibition has been born in. And me as an observer coming to the exhibition, I had this general feeling of this optimism coming through the art in different form. There was the photography, also an amazing sense of beauty coming through. And there was like this shell, the glass shell, amazing to look at. It's awakened the faith in goodness, in beauty. So I want to say thank you to all of you that you, during this time, you kept going with the positivity and keeping up this in a form of such a complementary way. And I have a question to you, since you are critics of profession. How would you, for the artist coming now from school to the world, presenting their sparkle, if I can say like this, what would be your critic guidance so they hit the sweet spot? Oh, come on, critics. Thank you.
But I want to point back to something Mitch said just before now, because it's difficult to calculate it too much as well, because it becomes over obviously calculated. It is better, I think, to go via the way of trying to create a space together, both in writing, but why not also exhibit each other in improvised spaces and set your own discourse. That would be my advice. No, create your own spaces so that you can set up the discourse you want to have, the conversations you want to have going, both in the art and in the conversations around the art. That would be the better place, rather than trying to latch onto something that's already there.
Maybe if you try to please the critics too much, they're going to understand that that's what you're trying to do. Maybe
you have misunderstood, actually, or maybe I have mispresented. But it's not about pleasing the critics, because critics are only giving like the window to look at the art in a way how they see the art. So they have like this the lens to see through. So it's not about pleasing the critics, but to being allowed to see through the lens as well as the artist. So that was that's what I meant. To what would be the guidance through the lens to hit the spot, but not to please the critics in a way like yeah, I think you understood.
Yeah, we just don't know how to make it. We know, are you making it or not? But it's very, of course, subjective. And but I liked what you said about this optimistic feeling, because it reminded me one phrase of Andy Warhol: "Don't cry, work," and that's all what it's all about, actually. And if you are interested in that kind of thing of understanding your role of artist, I personally recommend one work of Manifesto of Thomas Hirschhorn. It's an artist from Switzerland, working mostly in France, living in France, but working, of course, around the world. And he wrote a manifesto in 2008, I think, about how to make art politically, but not to make political art. And it's very deep, a lot of very concrete things which he describing in this manifesto, which I just read it recently because I met him personally in Latvia and was preparing for the interview, and so reading his text, and it's incredibly actual and about now. And this actually phrase of making art politically but not political art, actually he also took it from Godard, French filmmaker, and so it also not something completely new, but on some kind of tradition. And it's good to know this tradition, and it really makes your mind, I think, in the right way, if there are right ways.
Do we have time for one last question, maybe? Anyone? No one?
No?
Okay. Then do you have anything, like any last comments? Anything you want to share before we end it?
The only thing I would say is that every time the slide got flipped back there, and I would turn around and I would think, "Oh God, there's so much art in this exhibition. We could just you could just show us slides for 3 hours, and we could sort of go through this." We're not going to do that. Don't worry. We're going to have a nice drink and talk. It's fine. But it could be done, because there's so much art in this exhibition that we could keep talking about, and yeah, maybe that's happening in an alternate universe version of this talk. So that is to say, of course, there was absolutely no hope of talking about every work in the show. This could never happen, but we could go through them piece by piece and have great conversations about all the stuff.
Also, with every time we are coming back here and going around next time, it changes also. Yeah, some works come out, so it's really big show. A lot of things.
Well, yeah, that's really important, right? It's a big show, and things change the more you take time with them, and that the artwork changes and grows the more circuits you do. So maybe that's another answer to the question from the back. Like take your time with art. Like because take your time with art because it really can it benefits from intimacy and long-term contact.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully not. No. Yeah.
Okay, then.
Thank you.
Thank you
so
Thank
much.